some exercises, we start discussing a simple exercise where you're creating a 2 versus 1, but then you want progressions within that 2 versus 1. So it might be the case where you create a chaser, and now you're creating an extra element of pressure to the two players that they have a 66 advantage against 33%, of course. If they're not fast enough, the chaser now will come back, and now it's a 2v2 situations. So this becomes a 50-50 situation. How you explain these to the players, that's a different element, and that's where the coaches then they need to develop their feedback. Hi everyone, welcome to the 4th episode of this new series on football club management. Today we are going to speak about how to deal with methodology. So we're going now to the technical department before we go into financials and budgeting and so on. I want now to focus on the coaches and how can the club create a structure that will help the coaches to develop their own methodology. But this one needs to be aligned with everything that we spoke before. So how can you create a methodology that embodies the vision, the mission, the objectives, and the strategies of the club? And also, how can people be related, feel related to that methodology? And I think you can agree with me that it's very different when you are working, and of course, I'll give you examples that everyone knows in the world of football, but you need to create your reality, you need to understand your context, and of course, with that context, you will be able to then help to start building your methodology. And you're going to agree with me that it's different to build a methodology within the under 14s, boys or girls, if you are talking about Barcelona, and if you compare that with Atletico Madrid. Everything will be different, and of course, the context of the location that you are in, or even the reality of the club at the moment, because it might be a club that is now struggling. And again, let's think about Manchester United, or it might be a club that is very powerful at the moment as Manchester City. They are even in the same geographical location. So you need clearly to understand the limitations and the good things, the good side of things of the location that you are in. You need to really know the market, and you need to listen to the community. You also need to listen to the fans. So I'm from Portugal, and in my reality is very different when you think about Sporting or Benfica, because they are both from Lisbon, although they are very different clubs, but they are in the same geographical location. And then you think about Porto, that is in a complete different location with a pattern of behaviors, of even location. The weather is different, so there's a lot of things that are different, and you need to take all this in consideration because people behave differently and they expect, of course, different things from their teams. So this is always something that you need to consider when you are developing your methodology. That is a broader theme than the game plan or the strategy for a specific match or any of that. Therefore, once you are creating this clear identity, that it translates not only what is being done on the under 8s, but there's also a pathway, a clear pathway with a clear identity that will provide then the support for the under 12s, 14s, 16s, eventually to the first team if you have that, because eventually that's what you want to get. You want someone to reach you when they are 5 or 6 years old, and you want to keep that player, develop that player for older ages, adults eventually. That is the biggest challenge, by the way, because if you are to sign a staff, a coach, and you tell that coach, he or she, that the work will only be evaluated after 8 years, 10 years, because that's the time that a player is 6 years old or 7 years old and will reach adults when they are 18. So that means you have 10, 11 years between one or two. So that means If the point A is here and the point B is after 10 or 11 years, the challenge is now, how do you create a clear identity, a clear pathway where everything makes sense, where everything is specific to the needs, to the development stages that all these players have? That is where methodology comes into. Again, it's not about creating professionals, but it's creating a clear identity. It's about creating a clear pathway that will then eventually will help them to reach professional stages. So a clear element now is, how do you create these for the coaches? How you make this relevant for the coaches? Because it will be very hard for a coach to be with you for 10 years. However, you need to, and this is where we make the connection to the learning stages where we talked before about the TLC. This is where the coaches need to be heard. The methodology is there to implement as a club, as a broader perspective, to then be implemented by the coaches. And the coaches, they will have their individuality. They will have their touch, the individual touch. And that is something that you want, because you want people that are able to also create within the boundaries of your methodology. They need to explore those boundaries. They need to explore whatever they have as concepts. And now when we think about the game model, they need to have that clarity, but also the freedom to create within the methodology that you have created. This is key, and this is something that, if you're thinking about retention of staff, this is something that you need to seriously look into. When you think about how can you create a learning system, how can you create an environment where people want to be and to develop within that environment, you think about the methodology, you think about the learning outcomes, you think about the learning systems that you create within the club. And this can be, again, a weekly meeting where all the staff from the boys pathway or the girls pathway, they meet and they discuss ideas. And then monthly, you have a general meeting where everyone discusses what you're going to deliver on the annual planning, the mesocycles, the morpho cycles. This is something that we're going to speak on the next episode, how to build them. And all these planning sheets, all these planning strategies, they will now help you and help all these coaches to individually develop their ideas about the exercises, about their own teams. Because sometimes you're going to discuss challenges. You're going to discuss not only presentations of exercise that work well or bad for a specific age group or a specific gender, but those might be integrated within the plans of the other coaches. They might be even developed from the coaches, taking that example, that specific exercise, and then implement it into a different way where it's more relatable. I will give you a clear idea that we have here in the office every week. Some exercises, we start discussing a simple exercise where you're creating a 2 versus 1, but then you want progressions within that 2 versus 1. So it might be the case where you create a chaser, and now you're creating an extra element of pressure to the two players that they have a 66 advantage against 33%, of course. If they're not fast enough, the chaser now will come back, and now it's a 2v2 situations. So this becomes a 50-50 situation. How you explain these to the players, that's a different element. And that's where the coaches then, they need to develop their feedback planning and so on. But providing these elements of clarity, providing these exercises as examples, you might be a coach that will create these by controlling the ball, by the pace, controlling the progression, because there are different elements of progression. You might even create 2 versus 1 situation with a chaser, or you might create an exercise where you have one defender retain in a specific space and another defender retain in a different space. So you always have a 2 versus 1 relationship in each specific space, but in reality it's a 2 versus 2, although the two defenders are blocked in 2 specific spaces. So there are different elements, and the coaches will develop within your club, within the context of your club, based on a single methodology, in a clear identity, in a clear pathway. We are ending this episode, and you will notice by now that all the episodes are becoming smaller and smaller, because the message is already there, the foundations are there. If you missed the foundations, go back in time and review the episodes 1, 2, and 3, where we speak about the mission, the vision, and of course the values and objectives. And now we take that to a strategic approach. We took that for TLC and the learning and how that can have an impact on the staff that you have, not only on the staff that you have on the field as coaches, but also on the admins, on the executive committee, on the president, as well as something that needs to go from top to bottom. And now, once we are taking these to more the technical department, to the coaches, it is very important for you to understand that everything is connected, and all the departments, they will have a say on formatting the culture. Because again, I'll repeat this sentence again. The culture is how people behave when you are not there. Because that's the culture. And once you think about this, people is the key element. Because people, they're going to embody the culture. They're going to build the culture. Again, clubs, companies, institutions, whatever, they are built by people, they are made by people, and they can only work if the people have the right intentions and if the people have the right development stages and of course the right outcomes as well. I hope you enjoyed it. Next, we're going to be speaking about, we're going to remain on the technical department. We're going to speak about the cycles, those ones that I was speaking now, how to build an annual planning, mesocycles, morphocycles, and of course, how can this have an impact on the game plan, on the strategies that you are trying to implement week by week? What do they mean? What is the time length that you should expect for each one of them? And how can this have an impact on the training sessions? And this will create two key elements here, which are repetition, challenging repetition, and of course consistency on the delivery, on the message of the things that you are delivering. I hope you enjoyed. Join me on the next episode. And you already know, if you have any doubts, send me a message, write a comment, and follow us so that you can, of course, get a notification every time there's a new episode coming out. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next episode.